Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her position at the shooting range. The morning sun was already beating down on the outdoor facility, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her rifle. This wasn't her first time at a gun range, but it was her first time at the prestigious Blackwater training facility, known for hosting some of the most skilled marksmen in the country. She had saved for months to afford this weekend training camp, hoping to improve her shooting skills for the upcoming police academy entrance exam. Growing up in a small town where her father worked as a security guard, Sarah had always dreamed of becoming a police officer. But, first, she needed to pass the marksmanship test, which had become her biggest obstacle. "Mind if I take the lane next to you?" a deep voice asked from behind her. Sarah turned to see a tall man in military fatigues, his chest decorated with various patches and medals. His name tag read Reynolds and, below it, U.S. Army Sniper. He was probably in his late 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His confidence was evident in the way he carried himself, like someone who had never missed a target in his life. "Of course," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She had heard about military snipers. These were people who could hit targets from distances that seemed impossible to ordinary shooters. Reynolds set up his equipment with practiced efficiency. His rifle was clearly expensive and customized, probably worth more than Sarah's entire monthly salary at the diner where she worked. He glanced over at Sarah's basic hunting rifle, a gift from her father that she had been practicing with for the past year. "First time here?" Reynolds asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes, I'm training for the police academy exam," Sarah said, hoping to sound more confident than she felt. Reynolds chuckled softly. "Police academy, huh? Let me guess, you're worried about the marksmanship test?" Sarah nodded, not sure if she should feel embarrassed or grateful that someone was taking an interest in her situation. "I've trained a lot of police recruits over the years," Reynolds continued, loading his rifle with smooth, automatic movements. "Most of them struggle with the same thing. They think shooting is just about pointing and pulling the trigger. But real marksmanship is an art form." He gestured toward the targets downrange. "See those targets at 300 yards? For someone like me, that's basically point-blank range. I can put 10 rounds through the same hole from that distance. But, for police work, you'll probably never need to shoot beyond 25 yards. Sarah felt a mix of admiration and intimidation. She had been struggling to hit targets consistently at just 100 yards, and here was someone talking about 300 yards like it was nothing. "Want to see something impressive?" Reynolds asked, not waiting for an answer. He raised his rifle, took a brief moment to aim, and fired. Even from their position, Sarah could see that he had hit the bullseye perfectly. "Nice shot," she said genuinely. "That was just warming up," Reynolds replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let me show you what real shooting looks like." Over the next few minutes, Reynolds demonstrated his skills with a series of increasingly difficult shots. He hit targets at various distances, adjusted for wind conditions, and even managed to hit moving targets that the range operators set up for advanced training. Each shot was precise, calculated, and seemingly effortless. Sarah watched in fascination, taking mental notes of his technique. The way he controlled his breathing, the steady positioning of his body, the smooth trigger pull, everything looked so natural and fluid. "Your turn," Reynolds said, stepping back from his lane. "Let's see what you can do." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she took position. She was aware that not only was Reynolds watching, but several other shooters at the range had also gathered to observe. Word had spread quickly that a military sniper was giving an impromptu demonstration. She aimed at a target 100 yards away, took a deep breath, and fired. The shot went wide, hitting the outer ring of the target. Not terrible, but far from impressive, especially after watching Reynolds' performance. Reynolds said thoughtfully. "Try again. This time, focus on your breathing." Sarah's second shot was better, hitting closer to the center, but still not the tight grouping she had been hoping for. She could feel the disappointment in herself, and she worried that it was showing on her face. "It's okay," Reynolds said, though his tone had changed slightly. "Shooting takes years to master. Most people don't understand that it's not just about natural talent, it's about understanding physics, psychology, and having the mental discipline to perform under pressure. Sarah nodded, trying to absorb his advice, but she could sense that something had shifted in Reynolds' attitude toward her. The thing is, Reynolds continued, his voice becoming more serious, police work requires a different kind of shooting than what I do. Military snipers work alone, in controlled conditions, with time to calculate every variable. Police officers have to make split-second decisions in chaotic situations. He paused, watching as Sarah prepared for another shot. I've seen too many police officers who thought they could handle firearms just because they passed their academy training. Real-world situations are completely different. Sarah fired again, this time hitting much closer to the center. She felt a small surge of satisfaction, but Reynolds didn't seem impressed. Better, he said, but still not consistent. Consistency is everything in this field. You can't afford to have good days and bad days when lives are on the line. Other shooters were beginning to lose interest and return to their own lanes, but Reynolds seemed determined to continue his commentary on Sarah's performance. You know, he said, leaning against the barrier between their lanes, I don't want to discourage you, but police work might not be the right career path if marksmanship is this challenging for you. There are plenty of other ways to serve your community. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had been struggling with self-doubt about her shooting abilities, and Reynolds' words hit directly at her deepest fears. But something inside her sparked with defiance. I appreciate the advice, she said carefully, but I've been working toward this goal for 3 years. I'm not ready to give up just because I'm not at your level yet. Reynolds shrugged. I'm just being realistic. I've seen a lot of people waste time and money chasing dreams they're not equipped for. Sometimes it's better to face facts early rather than learn the hard way. His words stung, but Sarah forced herself to remain calm. She had heard similar discouragement before, from her high school guidance counselor who suggested she pursue nursing instead of law enforcement, from her ex-boyfriend who thought police work was too dangerous for women, and even from some family members who worried about her chosen career path. Maybe you should stick to civilian life, Reynolds added with what seemed like genuine concern. There's no shame in knowing your limitations. The range fell quiet around them. Even the sound of other shooters seemed to fade into the background as Sarah processed what Reynolds had just said. She looked down at her rifle, then back at the target downrange where her shots had created a scattered pattern around the center ring. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe Reynolds was right. Maybe she was fooling herself about her abilities. Maybe all those hours of practice, all those dreams of wearing a police uniform and protecting her community, were just unrealistic fantasies. But then, something else stirred inside her, something stronger than doubt. It was the same feeling she had experienced when she decided to pursue law enforcement despite everyone's concerns. It was the determination that had driven her to work double shifts at the diner to save money for training. It was the memory of her father telling her that the best police officers weren't necessarily the ones who started with the most natural talent, but the ones who refused to quit when things got difficult. Reynolds was watching her carefully, probably waiting to see if his words would convince her to pack up and leave. Several other shooters had stopped their own practice to observe what had become an uncomfortable situation. Sarah took a deep breath and looked directly at Reynolds. You might be right about my current skill level, she said quietly. But you're wrong about my potential. She turned back to her rifle, made some adjustments to her stance based on what she had observed during Reynolds' demonstration, and prepared for another shot. This time, she blocked out everything around her, the watching eyes, the whispered conversations, and especially Reynolds' skeptical expression. The shot rang out across the range, and Sarah lowered her rifle to see the result. It wasn't perfect, but it was her best shot of the day, hitting just outside the bullseye. Interesting, Reynolds said, and Sarah couldn't tell if there was respect or amusement in his voice. What happened next would change everything, not just for Sarah's confidence, but for her entire understanding of what it meant to be truly skilled with a firearm. Because sometimes the most important lessons come not from success, but from the moment when someone believes in themselves enough to prove their doubters wrong. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and the temperature at the range continued to rise. But, for Sarah Martinez, the real test was just beginning. Sarah's improved shot seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. Reynolds studied the target through his scope, his expression unreadable. The other shooters who had been watching began to murmur among themselves, some nodding approvingly at Sarah's progress. "Lucky shot," Reynolds said finally, though his tone was less confident than before. "Let's see if you can repeat it." Something had changed in Sarah's mindset. The fear and self-doubt that had been clouding her judgment began to clear, replaced by a calm focus she had never experienced before. She realized that she had been so worried about impressing everyone around her that she hadn't been shooting for herself. She loaded another round and took her position. This time, instead of rushing, she took her time to remember everything her father had taught her during their weekend hunting trips. Her father wasn't a military sniper or a professional trainer, but he had been a steady, patient teacher who emphasized the fundamentals. "Breathe naturally," she whispered to herself, repeating his words. "The rifle is just an extension of your body. Don't fight it, work with it." The second shot was even better than the first, hitting just inside the bullseye. A small cheer went up from some of the other shooters, but Sarah barely heard it. She was entering a zone of concentration that felt almost meditative. Reynolds frowned. "Beginner's luck has to run out sometime," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. But Sarah wasn't listening to Reynolds anymore. She was thinking about something her father had told her years ago, something she hadn't fully understood until this moment. "The best shooters aren't the ones who never miss," he had said. "They're the ones who learn something from every shot, even the bad ones." Looking back at her earlier shots, Sarah began to see patterns. When she had been nervous and trying to impress Reynolds, her shots had pulled to the right. When she had been angry about his comments, they had gone high. But when she focused purely on the mechanics of shooting, when she trusted her training and ignored the external pressure, her accuracy improved dramatically. She fired a third shot. Bullseye. The range fell completely silent. Reynolds stopped adjusting his own equipment and stared downrange at Sarah's target. Even through the scope, it was clear that her last 3 shots had formed a tight group in the center of the target. "Well, I'll be damned," said an older man shooting 2 lanes over. "Girl's got some serious natural talent." Reynolds' jaw tightened. 3 good shots don't make a marksman," he said loudly. "Anyone can get lucky for a few minutes. Real shooting is about consistency over time, under pressure, in all kinds of conditions." Sarah turned to face him, her confidence growing with each word. "You're absolutely right," she said calmly. "So let's test that theory." The challenge was implicit, but everyone at the range understood what she was suggesting. Reynolds looked around at the gathering crowd of shooters, all watching to see how he would respond. His reputation was clearly important to him, and backing down from a challenge issued by a novice would not look good. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah thought for a moment. She knew she couldn't compete with Reynolds at long distances or in the specialized skills that made him a military sniper. But maybe there was another way to test true shooting ability. "How about a practical shooting challenge?" she suggested. "Something closer to what police officers actually face in real situations." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Multiple targets at varying distances, all under 100 yards. Time pressure. Maybe some movement required between shooting positions." Sarah was thinking out loud, drawing on what she had learned about police training requirements. Whoever gets the highest combined score wins. The suggestion sparked immediate interest among the other shooters. This wasn't the kind of competition they usually saw at the range, where most contests focused on pure accuracy at fixed distances. This would be more dynamic, more realistic. "That's actually a great idea," said the range master, who had been listening to the conversation. "We've got the equipment set up for exactly that kind of course. We use it for law enforcement training." Reynolds looked uncomfortable for the first time since Sarah had met him. His expertise was in precision shooting from concealed positions, often at extreme distances. The kind of dynamic, close-range shooting Sarah was proposing played to different skills entirely. "I don't know," he said, trying to maintain his air of superiority. "That's not really my specialty. Sniper work is about patience, precision, and perfect shot placement from extreme range." "But, you said police work requires split-second decisions in chaotic situations," Sarah reminded him, using his own words. "Wouldn't this be a better test of the kind of shooting skills that actually matter for law enforcement?" The crowd of onlookers was growing, and Sarah could sense their anticipation. Word was spreading through the range that something interesting was about to happen. Reynolds found himself trapped by his own arguments. He had spent the morning lecturing Sarah about the difference between military sniping and police shooting, and now she was challenging him to prove his skills in the area he had claimed to understand better than she did. "Fine," he said finally. "But, let's make it interesting. If I win, you agree that maybe law enforcement isn't the right career path for you. If you somehow manage to win." He paused, clearly not considering that possibility very seriously. "If you win, I'll personally write you a recommendation letter for any police academy you want to apply to." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. A recommendation from a military sniper would carry enormous weight with any law enforcement agency. But, the stakes also made the challenge more frightening. Was she really prepared to risk her dreams on a shooting contest with someone of Reynolds' caliber? She looked around at the faces watching her. Most seemed encouraging, but she could see doubt in some eyes. After all, Reynolds was clearly an accomplished marksman, regardless of his specialty. What was she thinking, challenging someone so far above her skill level? But, then, she remembered something else her father had taught her. "Confidence isn't about knowing you'll win," he had said. "It's about being willing to try, even when you're not sure of the outcome." "Deal," Sarah said, extending her hand to Reynolds. His handshake was firm, perhaps a little too firm, as if he were trying to intimidate her through physical pressure. But, Sarah had worked in restaurants and construction jobs to pay for college. Her grip was stronger than he expected. The range master quickly organized the course. 6 targets at distances from 25 to 75 yards, positioned at different angles and heights to simulate realistic shooting scenarios. Shooters would move between 3 different positions, engaging targets within specific time limits. Points would be awarded based on accuracy and speed, with penalty points for missed shots or exceeding time limits. "This is actually a modified version of the course we use for state police certification," the range master explained. "Both shooters will use the same ammunition and similar rifles to keep things fair." As they prepared for the competition, more people gathered to watch. Word had spread beyond the range itself, and several off-duty police officers and military personnel had arrived to see the unusual matchup between the experienced sniper and the determined rookie. Reynolds went through an elaborate warm-up routine, adjusting his equipment and taking practice shots. He clearly wanted everyone to see his level of preparation and professionalism. Sarah, meanwhile, used the time to walk through the course mentally, visualizing each target and planning her movements between positions. "You sure about this?" asked the older shooter who had complimented her earlier. "Reynolds has a reputation around here. He doesn't usually lose competitions." Sarah nodded, though she was feeling the pressure of having so many people watching. "I have to find out what I'm capable of," she said. "If I can't handle pressure here, how can I expect to handle it as a police officer?" The wisdom in her words surprised even herself. This competition had become about more than just proving Reynolds wrong. It was about discovering whether she really had what it took to pursue her dreams, or whether she had been fooling herself all along. As the time for the competition approached, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. She wasn't thinking about winning or losing anymore. She was thinking about every practice session with her father, every hour spent at the local range, every dream she had harbored about serving her community. All of that had led to this moment. Reynolds finished his warm-up and announced he was ready. The crowd gathered around the course, positioning themselves for the best view of what was about to unfold. "Gentlemen and ladies," the range master called out, "we have an unusual competition today. Military precision versus police-style practical shooting. May the best marksman win." The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal not just who was the better shooter, but what kind of person each competitor truly was. And, for Sarah Martinez, everything she had worked toward for the past 3 years was about to be put to the ultimate test. The range master flipped a coin to determine who would shoot first. Reynolds called heads and won, which seemed to please him. "I prefer to set the standard," he said with a confident smile. Sarah watched carefully as Reynolds took his position at the first shooting station. The course required him to engage 2 targets from a standing position, then move to a kneeling position for 2 more targets, and, finally, to a prone position for the final 2 targets. Each sequence had to be completed within specific time limits. Reynolds moved through the course with obvious skill, though Sarah noticed something interesting. His movements were precise but somewhat mechanical, as if he were following a checklist rather than flowing naturally through the exercise. His shots were accurate, hitting the scoring zones on all targets, but his transitions between positions seemed unnecessarily slow and deliberate. When he finished, the range master calculated his score, 92 out of 100 possible points. It was an impressive score that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Reynolds seemed satisfied, nodding as if the result confirmed what he had expected. "Not bad for a course I've never shot before," he said, addressing the crowd more than Sarah. "Should be interesting to see how someone with limited experience handles the pressure." Sarah took her position at the starting line, acutely aware of all the eyes watching her. For a moment, the weight of expectations threatened to overwhelm her. Reynolds' score was genuinely impressive, and she was about to attempt something she had never done before in front of a crowd of experienced shooters. But then, she heard her father's voice in her memory, something he had told her during one of their hunting trips when she had missed an easy shot. "Don't shoot for the people watching, Sarah. Don't even shoot for the target. Shoot for the person you want to become." The timer started, and Sarah began her run through the course. Something remarkable happened as she moved through the first sequence. All the nervousness and self-doubt seemed to fall away, replaced by an almost supernatural focus. She wasn't thinking about Reynolds' score or the watching crowd. She was simply responding to each target as it presented itself, trusting her training and instincts. Her movements were different from Reynolds, more fluid and natural, less rigid and formal. Where he had paused deliberately between targets, she flowed from one to the next in smooth transitions. Her shots came quickly but, without rushing, each one feeling perfectly timed. The crowd began to murmur as Sarah moved through the second position. Her speed was notably faster than Reynolds, but her accuracy wasn't suffering. If anything, her natural rhythm seemed to be improving her performance. By the time Sarah reached the final shooting position, even Reynolds was watching with obvious interest. Something special was happening, and everyone at the range could feel it. Sarah's final shots echoed across the range, and she lowered her rifle with a sense of completion that surprised her. She had no idea what her score would be, but she knew she had shot the best round of her life. Every shot had felt perfect, not because of perfect technique, but because she had finally stopped fighting herself and simply trusted her abilities. The range master began calculating scores while the crowd waited in suspense. Sarah noticed that Reynolds looked less confident than he had a few minutes earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," the range master announced, "Sarah's score is 96 out of 100 points." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah had not only beaten Reynolds' score, she had done so convincingly. But, more than that, she had demonstrated something that went beyond mere marksmanship. Reynolds stood silent for a moment, clearly processing what had just happened. His expression cycled through surprise, disbelief, and, finally, what might have been grudging respect. "How?" he asked Sarah directly. "You were struggling with basic accuracy an hour ago." Sarah thought about the question seriously. "I think I was trying too hard to be someone else," she said. "I was trying to shoot like you, or like what I thought a police officer should shoot like. But, when I stopped thinking about all that and just focused on doing what I knew how to do, everything changed." An older woman in the crowd, who Sarah later learned was a retired police sergeant, stepped forward. "That's exactly right," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The best officers I worked with weren't the ones who could perform tricks at the range. They were the ones who could stay calm and do their job when everything around them was chaos." Reynolds looked around at the crowd, clearly realizing that the situation had shifted dramatically. His earlier condescension towards Sarah now seemed petty and misguided, especially in light of her performance. "I owe you an apology," he said to Sarah, though his voice lacked the warmth of genuine contrition. "And, apparently I owe you a recommendation letter." But Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, with her response. "I don't want your recommendation," she said calmly. "I want to earn my way into the police academy based on my own abilities, not because someone felt obligated to help me." The crowd fell silent, clearly not expecting this turn. Reynolds looked confused, as if he couldn't understand why someone would turn down an offer that could significantly advance their career. "What I would like," Sarah continued, "is for you to remember this day the next time you meet someone who's working hard to achieve their goals. Maybe consider that talent comes in many forms, and that some people need time and encouragement to discover what they're capable of." The older police sergeant began clapping slowly, and others joined in. This wasn't just applause for Sarah's shooting performance, it was recognition of her character and wisdom. Reynolds nodded stiffly. "Point taken," he said. "I may have been too quick to judge." As the crowd began to disperse, several people approached Sarah to congratulate her and offer encouragement for her police academy plans. Among them was a captain from the state police who had heard about the competition and driven over to watch. "I don't know what your timeline is for academy application," he told Sarah, "but I'd like to give you my card. We're always looking for officers who can perform under pressure and maintain their composure." Sarah accepted the card gratefully, but more important than any career opportunity was the confidence she had gained about herself. She had faced her doubts and fears head-on, and discovered that she was stronger and more capable than she had realized. Later, as Sarah packed up her equipment, she reflected on the day's events. Reynolds had been partially right about one thing: real-world performance was very different from controlled practice. But he had been wrong about Sarah's potential, just as she had been wrong about her own limitations. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "How did the training go, sweetheart?" Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Better than I ever imagined, Dad. I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." The drive home gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened. The morning had started with her feeling uncertain about her abilities and her future. Now she felt ready to take on not just the police academy, but whatever challenges lay ahead in her chosen career. She thought about Reynolds and wondered if he would learn anything from their encounter. She hoped so, because she had learned something important about the difference between skill and wisdom, between technical ability and true leadership. As Sarah pulled into her driveway, she noticed her father waiting on the front porch, clearly eager to hear about her day. She had so much to tell him, but, most importantly, she wanted to thank him for teaching her that the best victories aren't the ones where you prove others wrong, but the ones where you discover who you really are. 6 months later, Sarah graduated at the top of her police academy class. She never used Reynolds' name or their encounter in any of her applications or interviews. Instead, she let her performance speak for itself, just as she had learned to do at the shooting range on that transformative day. Years later, as a respected detective with numerous commendations for her service, Sarah would sometimes tell the story to rookie officers struggling with self-doubt. She would explain that confidence isn't about never having fears or limitations, but about being willing to face them honestly and work through them with persistence and humility. The sniper who had mocked her at the range had unknowingly given her the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to discover that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. And, in the end, that discovery changed not just her aim, but her entire life trajectory.